The ocean spray tasted like salt and lies, until my best friend shoved me toward a cabin and whispered that I needed to run because the man in the tuxedo was a ghost. The salt spray hit my face, sharp and invigorating, a stark contrast to the suffocating humidity trapped inside the ballroom. I leaned against the railing of the Poseidon's Glory, watching the turquoise water churn miles below us, feeling that strange, dizzying mix of freedom and claustrophobia you only get on the open ocean. This was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, 2 weeks in the Caribbean, celebrating our 10-year friendship anniversary with Leo. Leo, my rock, my roommate from college, the guy who helped me move apartments 8 times, the one who knew exactly how I took my coffee and which shade of blue made my eyes look less tired. He was, ostensibly, a mid-level logistics manager for a shipping firm in Chicago. Dull, reliable, loves spreadsheets. That's what I knew. We were 4 days into the cruise, somewhere south of the Bahamas, and everything was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. Leo had been unusually jumpy the last 24 hours. He kept checking his phone, not with the casual glance of a guy tracking a work email, but with the tense alertness of a lookout. He'd excuse himself constantly, always heading toward the ship's business center or the farthest corner of the deck with a faint, almost inaudible electronic pulse coming from his pocket. Tonight was the captain's gala. I was wearing the ridiculous sequin dress Leo insisted looked dramatic, and he was impeccably tailored in a rented tuxedo that looked custom-made. As the band played some dreadful synthesized version of a 90s pop song, I watched Leo scanning the crowd, his smile pasted on but not reaching his eyes. "Relax, Leo," I said, sipping my champagne. "We're on vacation. The only threat here is scurvy or accidentally over-tipping." He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper that the ambient noise almost swallowed. "Did you see that waiter by the piano, the one with the too perfect mustache?" I followed his gaze. A young man, impossibly groomed, was refilling water glasses with almost surgical precision. "He's just good at his job, Leo. This is a 5-star vessel." "No, look at his ear. The slight redness, just behind the lobe. He's wearing a comms piece. And look at his shoes. They're weighted. High-end tactical soles, designed for silent movement on slick surfaces." My champagne flute paused halfway to my lips. This was Leo being Leo, overanalyzing a bad spy movie, perhaps. But the tension vibrating off him was real. "Leo, you're stressed. You haven't slept well." He shook his head, gripping my arm just above the elbow. His grip wasn't friendly. It was possessive, urgent. "Listen to me. We need to go to the cabin, now. Tell them you feel ill." Before I could argue, his eyes snapped wide open, fixed on something directly behind me. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "Damn it," he breathed out, a single syllable of pure dread. He didn't let go of my arm. Instead, he spun me around, shoving me hard toward the exit doors leading to the main promenade deck, away from the main dining area. "Run, Sarah. Don't look back. Go straight to cabin 712. Lock the door. Use the safety chain. Do not, under any circumstances, answer the door for anyone." His face was granite, stripped of all pretense of logistics manager. This was not Leo. This was a stranger wearing my best friend's face. "What is going on? Who are they?" I stammered, trying to pull back. "They aren't after you. They are after me. Just go." He didn't wait for my compliance. He shoved me again, harder this time, then released me and took 2 quick steps back toward the main floor. I stumbled, catching myself on a passing waiter, not the mustache guy, thank goodness, and scurried toward the nearest corridor, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't run down the hallway because Leo's instructions were clear. Don't look like you're running. I walked fast, trying to adopt the hurried but determined pace of someone late for a very important, legitimate appointment. As I rounded the corner leading to the upper deck cabins, I heard it. Not a scream, not a shout, but a precise, dull thump. It sounded like a heavy bag of flour hitting a plush carpet, followed immediately by the low, rhythmic beat of aggressive, focused movement. They hadn't waited. They'd moved instantly. I fumbled with my key card at 712, my hands slick with panic sweat. The card reader beeped irritably 3 times before finally flashing green. I burst inside, slamming the door shut, throwing the deadbolt, and hooking the safety chain just as a distant metallic scraping sound echoed down the corridor outside. I pressed my ear against the solid wood. Silence. A heavy, unnatural silence. The sounds of celebration from the ballroom were now miles away, a cheerful lie masking whatever chaos Leo had unleashed or encountered. I backed away from the door, glancing around our shared cabin. It looked normal. 2 neatly made beds, 2 suitcases slightly ajar, Leo's untouched glass of water on the nightstand. But I knew, deep in my gut, that everything had just shattered. Leo wasn't shipping cargo. He was running from something lethal. I needed to pack. I needed a plan. I snatched my small carry-on bag and started tossing in essentials: passport, cash, chargers. Suddenly, the small, discreet Bluetooth speaker Leo always kept on his desk crackled to life, a sound I'd never heard it make before. It wasn't playing music. It was a pure, clear tone, a high-pitched sequence of beeps that sounded distressingly technical. Then, a calm, unfamiliar voice, male, accented, definitely not Leo, spoke over the speaker. "Agent Nightingale, your distraction was noted. The asset is contained. You have exactly 90 seconds to secure the primary evidence and prepare for exfiltration." My blood turned to ice water. Agent Nightingale? My best friend Leo, the spreadsheet wizard, was Agent Nightingale? And what did they mean, the asset is contained? Were they talking about him? The speaker clicked off. Silence returned, heavier than before. I spun towards Leo's side of the room, my eyes darting frantically. Where would he hide something critical? Not in the suitcase, too obvious. My gaze landed on the thick, leather-bound journal he always carried, the one he claimed held bad poetry. It was sitting squarely on his pillow. I snatched it up, my fingers trembling so violently I almost dropped it. I flipped it open, expecting bad rhymes about sunsets. Instead, the entire first half of the journal was filled, margin to margin, with dense, perfectly arranged alphanumeric codes written in a tiny, precise hand. But tucked into the spine, hidden beneath a glued-down flap, was a single sealed white envelope addressed simply to S.M. My initials, Sarah Miller. As I tore the envelope open, my breath hitched. Inside wasn't a note, but a small, wafer-thin device, metallic and cold, attached to a plastic zip tie. Etched beneath the zip tie was a single, terrifying word: detonate. Before I could even process what I was holding, the cabin door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately, from the outside. The door handle stopped turning. It didn't rattle violently. It simply ceased its slow rotation, as if the person on the other side had felt a sudden internal warning. The pause lasted maybe 3 seconds, an eternity in the suffocating tension of the small cabin. I stood frozen, the thin metal device clutched in my left hand, the coded journal in my right. My mind was screaming 3 contradictory commands: run, hide, scream. I chose the one that felt most primal: hide. The bathroom was the only enclosed space. I slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving just a hairline crack open so I could see the main room without being seen. I crammed myself behind the heavy, thick bathrobe hanging on the hook behind the door, pulling the terry cloth over my head like a pathetic, flimsy shield. The voice from the speaker, the cold, accented voice, had mentioned exfiltration. They were operators, professional, and they thought Leo was compromised, or perhaps captured, which meant they were about to sweep this entire deck, room by room. Tick, tick, tick. My own pulse was deafening. Suddenly, a different sound. Not the turning handle, but the soft, almost loving slide of metal on metal. It was the sound of the magnetic lock being bypassed, professionally, surgically. They weren't picking the deadbolt. They were overriding the electronic system. The door hissed inward, not swinging open forcefully, but gliding inward with the smoothness of oiled machinery. 2 figures entered. They weren't the waiter. These men wore crisp, dark civilian clothes, tailored too perfectly for typical security guards. They moved in sync, one sweeping the room left, the other right, their eyes flicking over every surface. They radiated a controlled, lethal competence that made the hair stand up on my arms, despite the thick bathrobe. The one on the right, taller, severe haircut, paused by Leo's neatly made bed. He didn't search. He simply looked at the indentation where someone had rested their head moments ago. He grunted softly, a sound of confirmation. The shorter man was scanning the desk. He moved the water glass, scrutinized the lamp, and then his eyes locked onto the open journal resting where I'd dropped it in my panic. My heart stopped. The codes. He reached for it, but before his fingers touched the page, a sudden, loud, almost comical noise erupted from the hallway right outside our cabin door. A drunken roar, followed by the sound of breaking glass. "Hey, you bastards! Who touched my fancy cocktail?" The 2 operatives inside froze instantly, their focused concentration broken. They exchanged a lightning-fast glance. The taller one subtly brought a hand to his ear, murmuring something too low for me to catch. The distraction worked. The short operative glared at the doorway, clearly annoyed by the crude interruption. "Patrol shift change?" he muttered to his partner. "Stay focused," the tall one hissed back, turning his attention back to the room. They wouldn't risk a disturbance this close to an asset extraction point unless... He trailed off, his gaze sweeping over the now empty space near the desk where I'd dropped the journal, and then landing on the bathrobe, hiding me. He didn't see me, but he saw the slight depression in the carpet where my feet had been moments before. He took a cautious step toward the bathroom door. I knew this was it. If he pulled that robe aside, I was done. And I still had the device Leo gave me, the one marked detonate. It was now or never. I made the only move I could think of that created maximum chaos. Still hidden behind the thick cloth, I yanked the small device free, flipped the tiny safety catch I'd instinctively found near the zip tie, and hurled it with all my might across the room, aiming not at the men, but at the large flat-screen television mounted near the window. It struck the glass with a surprisingly loud thwack. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the room flooded with a piercing, high-pitched siren sound. Not a fire alarm, but something proprietary and intensely irritating, like 1,000 dentists' drills operating simultaneously. Simultaneously, the device emitted a blinding, strobing blue light that made the entire cabin unusable for vision. The 2 men reacted like soldiers under sudden chemical attack. They covered their eyes, stumbling backwards. "Jamming pulse! It's a countermeasure," the tall one yelled, clutching his head. This was my chance. I burst from behind the robe, abandoning the journal, and scrambled toward the cabin's balcony door. I ripped it open, ignoring the sudden rush of loud wind and sea air. The siren inside the room was agonizing. I vaulted over the low railing onto the narrow, shared balcony space separating our suite from the next one over. I didn't look back to see if they were pursuing. I just ran down the narrow metal grating toward the adjacent door, praying it was unlocked, praying the occupants weren't home, praying they weren't more agents. I threw myself against the neighboring balcony door, pounding on the glass, screaming, "Help! Fire! Open up!" The agents inside our room were recovering. I heard the tall one shout, his voice distorted by the pulsing siren. "She has the escape package! Lock down decks 5 through 10!" I slammed my shoulder against the glass panel of the neighboring balcony. It gave way with a sickening crack. Not the whole pane, but a secondary locking mechanism inside the frame, protesting under the impact. The door shuddered inward an inch. Behind me, I heard the sharp, authoritative click of a door overriding system being manually engaged. Our door to 712 was opening again, the siren abruptly cutting off, replaced by absolute, terrifying silence. They were coming. I kicked the balcony door one last time, managing to jar the frame open just enough to squeeze sideways through the gap. I tumbled onto the clean, private deck of the next suite, slamming the now-ajar door shut behind me. I didn't bother with the lock. I ran straight for the outer railing of this new balcony, peering over the edge. We were high up, very high up. The ocean was a black, swirling vortex far, far below. But beneath me, just a few feet down, was the deck for the private outdoor pools. Deck 14, if my memory of the brochure was correct. I gripped the cold metal railing, my knuckles white. Behind me, the door to the neighboring suite burst open. "She's gone over the railing! Stop her! Nightingale's girl is loose!" I didn't hesitate. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the salty night air, and swung my legs over the edge, beginning a desperate, silent slide down the slick, painted superstructure of the Poseidon's Glory, knowing that if I missed my footing now, I wouldn't just fall. I'd fall into the hands of the people who just neutralized my best friend. The painted metal of the ship's hull was slick with sea moisture and wax polish, offering almost zero purchase. My dress, the ridiculous sequin thing Leo had picked out, immediately snagged and tore against a sharp rivet as I slid down the sheer drop from deck 15 to deck 14. It was a blessing and a curse. The tears gave my palms a momentary friction point, but the sound of the fabric ripping was loud in the sudden quiet of the night. I dropped the last 3 feet onto the hard tiling of the private pool deck, landing awkwardly on my knees. The impact sent a jolt of white-hot pain up my shins, but adrenaline smothered the deeper ache. I didn't look up. I scrambled immediately toward the shadows cast by the overhanging structure of the deck bar. The agents wouldn't be far behind. They were professionals. If they couldn't use the internal systems, they'd use the external access points. I huddled low, listening. The rhythmic thrum of the ship's massive engines was the only constant sound. Then, faintly, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump from above. The sound of boots hitting the external hull as they rappelled down from the deck I'd just vacated. They were fast. Too fast. I crawled to the edge of the pool deck. This was a private section, reserved for the top-tier suites. There were only 3 sliding glass doors leading into the opulent rooms, all securely locked from the inside. The ocean was to my right, a black, hungry void. I had to get off this deck. Moving toward the interior stairwells felt like walking into a well-lit trap. My only viable option was the ship's exterior structure again, but this time descending further, maybe to the crew decks or one of the smaller tenderboat bays. As I edged along the tiled perimeter, I caught sight of something metallic glinting near one of the deck chairs. A discarded highball glass, clearly belonging to one of the suite occupants. I snatched it up, feeling the sharp edge of the broken rim. It was cheap insurance, but it was something. Just as I reached the far corner, the sliding glass door of the nearest suite hissed open. A man stepped out, silhouetted against the warm interior light. He wasn't one of the dark-suited men from the cabin. This man was older, wearing a silk dressing gown, holding a tablet computer. He looked profoundly annoyed. "What in God's name is going on out here? My wife is trying to sleep. Some kind of engine trouble?" he demanded, peering nearsightedly into the darkness. This was my unexpected opportunity. The agents would prioritize taking me down quietly, but this passenger was just an inconvenience, a potential witness to be dismissed. "Sir, I am so sorry," I said, pitching my voice to sound panicked but coherent. "I was exploring. I slipped on the railing. I'm so sorry for the noise. Please, can you point me toward the main elevator bank? I need to get back to my room immediately before security finds me." The man huffed, clearly taking pity on the clumsy tourist rather than suspecting a high-stakes manhunt. He gestured vaguely toward the center of the deck. "Stairs are that way, past the bar access. But you better hope security doesn't see you in that rag you're wearing." I gave a weak, apologetic nod, trying to look as much like a disheveled, mortified guest as possible. As I hurried past him, heading toward the direction he pointed, I saw his tablet screen. It wasn't showing hotel information. It was displaying schematics of the ship's upper decks, overlaid with blinking red icons. He wasn't a passenger. He was clearly one of them, probably a coordinator, monitoring the sweep. I didn't have time to react. As I passed him, he looked down at the tablet again, then back at me with slow, dawning realization. My performance must have been unconvincing under scrutiny. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice losing its sleepy annoyance, hardening instantly into professional command. "You're not assigned to this sector. Where is the Nightingale asset?" He dropped the tablet. It shattered on the tile, but not before he pressed a silent button on its side. Suddenly, the interior lights of the entire pool deck snapped on, flooding the area with harsh white visibility. I was exposed, caught between the man in the dressing gown and the spot where the men rappelling from above would land any second. I bolted toward the central access point, a narrow service door marked with a cryptic symbol that looked vaguely like a stylized anchor. I slammed the highball glass against the magnetic locking plate next to the handle, praying the delicate electronics would fry. A shower of sparks erupted from the plate, accompanied by a high-pitched whine. The door remained locked. The man in the dressing gown was closing the distance, moving with surprising speed for someone in silk pajamas. "Stop right there, Miss Miller," he barked. I yanked the handle. It was still deadlocked. I threw my shoulder against the door one last time, just as the heavy thud of two figures landing on the deck behind me announced the arrival of the primary extraction team. I was trapped between a locked door and three highly trained operatives. I looked down at my hands, still empty, realizing I'd lost the coded journal and the mysterious detonator in the frantic scramble. Then, from the direction of the stern, piercing through the sudden silence of the deck, came a sound that was instantly, chillingly familiar. The sharp, precise crack-crack of suppressed firing. It wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at the agents. The man in the dressing gown staggered, clutching his shoulder, a dark stain blooming rapidly through the expensive silk. I turned toward the sound, eyes wide, scanning the shadows near the railing. Emerging from the darkness, silhouetted against the ship's running lights, was a figure moving with fluid grace that belonged on a jungle trail, not a luxury liner. He was dressed in black tactical gear, blending perfectly with the night, and he held a weapon with casual expertise. It wasn't one of the men who had been in the cabin. This man was leaner, faster, and his face, catching the reflected light, was utterly unknown to me. But the way he moved, the coiled tension, the surgical placement of every step, it was professional, just like Leo. He locked eyes with me, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his weapon. He simply pointed his chin toward the open service door, the one I had failed to breach. Then, a voice, synthesized and electronically distorted, came from a small speaker hidden on his chest. "Go. Now. Nightingale sent me to clean up the mess. Don't look back." He took 2 deliberate steps toward the stunned operative in the dressing gown, raising his weapon. I had maybe 3 seconds before he engaged the threat and forgot about me entirely. I threw myself at the service door again, kicking at the seam where the lock had failed. This time, the impact, combined with whatever short circuit I'd caused, worked. The lock hissed, and the door gave way just as the first silenced shot rang out behind me. I tumbled through the opening into a narrow, dimly lit passage filled with the smell of diesel and steam, the functional guts of the ship. I didn't know who this new rescuer was, or if he was truly helping, but I knew I couldn't stay on that manicured deck. I scrambled to my feet, the passage already vibrating with the distant sounds of a firefight breaking out above me. I had escaped one trap, only to fall directly into the ship's engine room labyrinth, and I had no idea if the man who saved me intended to guide me to safety or simply use me as bait. The air in the bowels of the Poseidon's Glory was thick, hot, and oily, tasting of burnt fuel and pressurized steam. I slammed the service door shut, the sound of the scuffle above instantly muffled by the thick insulation and the roar of the ship's massive turbines vibrating through the metal deck beneath my worn-out heels. I was in a narrow corridor, lined with thick, insulated piping and humming electrical conduits, the arteries of the cruise liner. I risked a glance back. The door I'd just used was standard issue for restricted areas, clearly not designed to withstand a direct assault, but it provided precious seconds. I needed to vanish into this mechanical maze before the new arrival, my mysterious black-clad savior, realized I hadn't followed his instruction to keep moving. I chose a direction at random, plunging deeper into the echoing metallic labyrinth. Pipes hissed rhythmically, and every few yards I passed a warning light flashing an aggressive, sickly yellow. The lights were too dim for a security sweep. This was definitely crew territory, deep below the passenger decks. My mind raced, trying to process the events. Leo, the logistics manager, was Agent Nightingale. An organized scheme was hunting him. I was given a mysterious detonator. A masked operative had saved me from a second extraction team, and I was now hiding in the ship's machinery. I ran until my lungs burned, my adrenaline beginning its inevitable crash, leaving behind a tremor in my limbs that made grasping the pipes for balance difficult. I rounded a sharp corner and stopped dead. The corridor opened into a cavernous space, the main engine housing perhaps, dominated by huge, slowly rotating machinery that looked like something out of a Jules Verne novel. The noise here was overwhelming, a constant, bone-shaking thrum that made conversation impossible. And standing right in the center of this industrial cathedral, illuminated by the sporadic flashes of welding from a distant repair crew, was Leo. He was leaning against a massive turbine housing, looking utterly exhausted. Gone was the tuxedo. He was in dark, utilitarian clothing, the same shade of black as my recent rescuer, and he was nursing a deep gash above his brow, blood still faintly tracing a path down his jawline. He was holding an electronic device, tapping at its screen with grim concentration. "Leo!" I choked out, the sound completely swallowed by the machinery. I stumbled toward him, relief washing over me so intensely it nearly buckled my knees. He looked up, and the relief evaporated, replaced by an expression of profound despair. He didn't smile. He didn't embrace me. He shook his head slowly, sharply, and pointed frantically toward a narrow access ladder leading down into a sub-level grate, then back to the way I came, shaking his head again, signaling absolute denial. He pressed his fingers to his lips in a desperate silence gesture. I stopped 10 feet away, sensing the immediate danger of my discovery. I waved my hands, pointing to myself, then back toward the upper decks where the fighting had been. "What happened? Are you okay?" Leo finally managed to mouth 2 words over the din, his lips shaping them with painful clarity. "Not me." Then his eyes widened, fixing on something just behind me, something I couldn't see due to the angle of the large machinery housing. His face contorted in horror, a deeper, more profound terror than I'd seen when he thought the waiter was closing in. He didn't shout a warning. Instead, he acted with swift, brutal efficiency. He reached down, grabbed a heavy metal wrench lying nearby, and without breaking eye contact with me, he swung it with terrifying force against the main control panel next to the turbine he was leaning on. Sparks exploded outward in a blinding shower. The entire chamber plunged into darkness, save for the emergency red running lights kicking on throughout the deck. The deafening roar of the main engine sputtered, coughed, and then, catastrophically, began to slow, the massive turbines groaning in metallic protest. The ship was losing propulsion. Leo was now crouched, his face visible in the red glow, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. He pointed to the grate again, then stabbed a finger repeatedly toward the device in his hand, tapping it urgently. Before I could move, a voice, calm and precise, cut through the alarm klaxons now blaring throughout the engine room. A voice that was neither the accented operatives nor the gruff coordinators. This voice was cold, utterly emotionless, and sounded terrifyingly close. Agent Nightingale, an unauthorized system alteration. That was a costly maneuver, particularly when you are already facing charges of industrial espionage and attempting to compromise vital national assets. The black-clad figure from the railing stood at the entrance to the engine room, blocking my exit, his weapon now raised and steady. He was not the man who had saved me moments ago. This was someone new, perhaps the superior officer of the coordinator I'd seen upstairs. Leo looked from the new threat to me, his expression conveying 1,000 apologies and warnings. He didn't try to fight the newcomer. He raised the electronic device he held, the one he had been tapping, and slammed his thumb down on a single glowing green icon. "Sarah, get out. This is the last fail-safe," Leo screamed, his voice finally audible over the dying engines. The man in black flinched, recognizing the action too late. "No, stop that device. It's a full shutdown sequence." But it was too late. A high-pitched, grinding sound filled the air, the sound of emergency bulkheads slamming into place throughout the ship. The engines gave one final, agonizing shudder, and then silence. Absolute, profound silence, broken only by the distant, echoing sirens of the ship's security systems attempting to override the emergency lockdown. I was sealed in the engine room with a captured operative, a highly armed agent blocking the only exit, and a cruise liner that had just gone dead in the middle of the ocean. Leo looked back at me one last time, a flicker of a genuine, sad smile touching his lips, before he threw the electronic device hard into the spinning, now inert, gears of the closest turbine housing. Then, the agent in black turned, leveling his weapon directly at Leo's chest. "You have chosen your fate, Nightingale." The silence following the engine shutdown was louder than any explosion. It was the sound of total operational failure, the death knell of the Poseidon's Glory adrift in international waters. In the red emergency lighting, I saw the agent in black adjust his stance, his focus entirely on Leo, who stood defiant amidst the massive, silent machinery. "Leo, no!" I screamed, finally finding my voice, surging forward before I could rationalize the sheer stupidity of confronting an armed professional. But Leo didn't wait for the agent's shot. He didn't need to. He had set the stage for his own escape, one that was far more dramatic than a simple surrender. As the agent brought his weapon to bear, Leo didn't move to defend himself. Instead, he pressed his palm flat against the cold metal of the turbine housing he had just destroyed, right where he had thrown the electronic device. A low, rhythmic thrum began emanating from the casing, a sound that vibrated up through the floor plates and into my bones. It wasn't the engine. It was the device, the failsafe he'd mentioned. The agent in black hesitated, his highly trained instincts screaming at the uncontrolled variable. "What is that frequency? Nightingale, step away from the console." "It's not a console," Leo called back, his voice steady despite the imminent danger. "It's a remote beacon. You wanted the evidence? It's uploaded. And this ship? It's about to become a very large distraction." Before the agent could process the implications, before he could decide whether to shoot Leo or try to disable the beacon, a new sound ripped through the silence. It wasn't mechanical. It was high-altitude air displacement. A deep, resonant whump, whump, whump. Looking up toward the highest open ventilation shaft, I saw it, a shape descending rapidly on a thin, dark line. It wasn't a conventional rescue. It was a specialized insertion drone, large enough to carry a person, moving with incredible speed and precision directly toward our sealed-off section of the engine room. The agent swore viciously, abandoning his target for a moment to check his own communications. "Command, we have unauthorized aerial presence. High-level interception inbound. Status on Nightingale?" "No status on Nightingale, sir," a crackling reply came back. "He's gone dark. We are tracking the unauthorized upload. It appears to be a full data dump detailing Operation Chimera protocols. He broadcast everything." Leo took the momentary distraction to act. He didn't run for the ladder. Instead, he grabbed the heavy wrench again, not as a weapon, but as a tool. He swung it one last time, this time striking the locking mechanism of the only emergency hatch leading out onto the ship's rudder access stern, located just behind the engine housing. The hatch groaned open, revealing a dark vertical shaft leading toward the waterline. "Sarah, down the hatch! That drone is for you," Leo yelled, shoving me toward the opening with surprising gentleness. "Go! They'll follow the data trail, not the person who lit the fire." I stared at him, realization dawning like a painful sunrise. Leo hadn't been running to escape. He had been maneuvering us both toward a specific extraction point, using the cruise ship as a cover to upload highly classified information. He was the sacrifice. "I'm not leaving you," I cried, gripping the edge of the shaft opening. "Yes, you are," he said, his voice regaining its familiar warmth, the logistical manager finally coming back for the final order. He pulled a small, smooth silver item from his inner pocket. It looked like a high-tech cigarette case. He tossed it at my feet. "Keep this. It's your exit ticket. Tell them Agent Nightingale sends his regards." The agent recovered, snapping his weapon back up, but he was too late. The heavy drone had reached the ventilation shaft opening above, deploying a secondary tether system that looked like a secure harness. "You're too late, Agent Bravo," Leo said, turning his back on me and facing the armed operative. "The data is out. Now you can chase the messenger, or you can try to secure the source." Leo stepped directly into the path of the armed agent, a final, deliberate distraction. The agent hesitated for one crucial second, torn between eliminating the broadcasting asset and stopping the data leak. That second was all I needed. With a final, desperate surge of courage, I clipped the silver case to my waistband, swung my legs over the edge of the shaft, and slid down the heavy rope tether the drone had dropped. The rough fiber burned my hands, but I held tight. As I descended into the churning darkness near the hull, the last thing I saw illuminated by the flashing red lights was Leo standing tall, arms slightly spread, facing the agent. I heard the sharp, loud crack of the suppressed weapon one final time, followed by the immediate, furious roar of the drone's thrusters as it pivoted away from me, heading toward the agent, clearly programmed for immediate asset retrieval and cleanup. I hit the water hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs, but the silver case was securely fastened. I scrambled, kicking free of the tether, just as the drone's magnetic clamps engaged the area where Leo had been standing, pulling the still form of my best friend, the logistics manager who was secretly a master operative, upward into the night sky, away from the chaos he had created. I swam hard, diving deep to avoid any surface visibility, the chilling knowledge sinking in that Leo hadn't been captured. He had executed a pre-planned catastrophic exit strategy, ensuring I got the proof of everything. I surfaced 50 yards from the silent, drifting hulk of the Poseidon's Glory. A small, fast, inflatable craft, pitch black and utterly silent, cut through the waves toward me, its navigation lights off. As I hauled myself over the low gunwale, a figure in civilian waterproof gear handed me a towel and a fresh change of clothing without a word. "Where are we going?" I managed to gasp out, shivering violently. The person operating the boat looked at me, their face obscured by the glare of the distant cruise ship lights. They held up a secure satellite phone, already dialing. "Somewhere safe, Sarah," the driver said, their voice calm and professional, distinctly American. "Agent Nightingale's extraction was successful. We are taking you to the rendezvous point. He anticipated you'd be followed. He knew they'd try to pin this whole thing on you, so he made sure you were the only clean exit." They paused, handing me the phone. "He left this message. He said you need to call this number when you're ready to decide what to do with the data he uploaded. He's already waiting for the fallout." The screen displayed a single contact, the network. I looked back one last time at the dark, dying ship. My best friend had just traded his entire life for my freedom and the exposure of a massive clandestine operation. I gripped the silver case, the insurance policy, and answered the phone, ready to start the war he had just begun for me.